It's 11 p.m. Your baby has been awake for 3 hours. You've rocked, fed, shushed, swaddled, and Googled every sleep trick the internet has ever produced. And your baby? Wide awake, staring at the ceiling like they're solving a math problem. And somewhere in the fog of your exhaustion, you start to wonder, is something wrong with my baby? Am I doing something wrong? Here's what nobody tells you in those early weeks. Your baby isn't fighting sleep because they're difficult. They're not manipulating you. They're not undertired or overtired or just being a baby. Their brain, that extraordinary, rapidly wiring, never-been-used-before brain, is doing something genuinely complex. And once you understand what it's actually doing, everything changes. Not just your strategy, your whole relationship with the night. Stay with me, because by the end of this, the 3 a.m. wake-up is going to feel completely different. And I mean that. Let's start with the most fundamental reason your baby fights sleep. And it's one that most parenting advice completely glosses over. Your baby does not have a working circadian clock. Not a broken one. Not a slow one. Not one that needs to be trained. A circadian rhythm is a roughly 24-hour internal biological cycle that tells your body when to sleep, when to wake, when to release hormones, when to drop core temperature. In adults, this system is so deeply embedded that it runs even when you're isolated from all light and time cues. It's ancient. It's powerful. In a newborn, it simply doesn't exist yet as a functional system. Here's why. The master clock in the brain, a cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, requires a hormone called melatonin to anchor its cycles to the outside world. Melatonin is produced by the pineal gland in response to darkness. But in newborns, the pineal gland doesn't begin producing meaningful amounts of melatonin until somewhere between 6 and 12 weeks of age. Before that, the system has no anchor. Day and night are neurologically identical to your baby. What does that actually mean for you at 11 p.m.? It means your baby isn't choosing to be awake. Their brain has no internal signal telling them it's nighttime. The darkness you've carefully engineered in their room, they can't act on it yet. Their nervous system isn't receiving that message. And here's where it gets even more interesting. In the womb, the fetus received maternal melatonin through the placenta. Your melatonin crossing through the placenta was the baby's entire circadian signal. The moment they're born, that supply is cut. If you're breastfeeding, melatonin does pass into breast milk, and research has noted that evening breast milk contains measurably higher melatonin concentrations than morning milk. Some researchers believe this is part of how breastfeeding gradually helps entrain the infant's developing clock. But it's a slow process, a gentle handoff, not an immediate fix. So when you hear, "My baby has their days and nights mixed up," what you're really hearing is, "My baby's brain hasn't yet built the hardware to know the difference." That's not a behavioral problem. That's developmental biology on schedule. The circadian system begins to consolidate between 6 and 12 weeks, and most parents notice a shift around the 3-month mark, not because they did anything right or wrong, but because the brain reached a maturation milestone it was always going to reach. Understanding this doesn't make the nights shorter, but it does mean you can stop searching for what you're doing wrong, because the answer, for now, is nothing. There's a second system running in your baby's brain alongside the circadian clock, and it's just as important for understanding why sleep is so hard. It's called sleep pressure, and it's driven by a molecule called adenosine. Here's how it works in adults. Every hour you're awake, adenosine builds up in your brain. It's a byproduct of neural activity, the metabolic cost of thinking, moving, processing the world. As adenosine accumulates, you feel increasingly sleepy. This is the pressure building towards sleep. When you finally sleep, adenosine clears. You wake up feeling refreshed. This is why caffeine works, by the way. Caffeine doesn't give you energy. It blocks adenosine receptors, so you can't feel the pressure that's already there. Now here's the critical difference in infants. Newborns build adenosine, and therefore sleep pressure, much faster than adults, and they clear it much faster too. A newborn's wake window, the amount of time they can comfortably sustain wakefulness before sleep pressure becomes overwhelming, is somewhere between 45 and 90 minutes in the early weeks. By 4 months, it might be 90 minutes to 2 hours. Compare that to an adult's 16+ hours. What this means practically is that your baby's sleep pressure system is extremely sensitive. Miss the window, keep them awake even 20 or 30 minutes past the point where adenosine has peaked, and something counterintuitive happens. The brain, interpreting the continued wakefulness as a threat, triggers a stress response. Cortisol and adrenaline begin to rise. The baby gets a second wind. Their eyes go bright. They become harder to settle, not easier. Parents often read this as the baby not being tired yet. In reality, the baby is past tired. The stress response has temporarily masked the exhaustion. This is one of the most common traps in infant sleep. The baby shows clear sleepy cues, eye rubbing, yawning, zoning out, and the parent thinks, just a few more minutes, they're not quite ready. Those few minutes tip the balance. The adenosine that was going to ease them into sleep gets overridden by a cortisol spike, and now you have a wired, crying, inconsolable baby who looks nothing like a tired baby. Experienced parents and pediatric sleep researchers describe the same observable pattern. The baby who seemed almost asleep at minute 75 is suddenly arching their back and screaming at minute 95. This isn't a behavior change. It's a neurochemical one. So if you've ever thought your baby got a second wind right when you were sure they'd fall asleep, you were right. You just didn't know it was cortisol doing the driving. You've seen it. The baby is finally asleep. You lower them into the crib with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. You hold your breath. You begin to back away. And then arms fly out, eyes snap open, and the crying begins again. That's the Moro reflex, and it's one of the most misunderstood features of infant neurology. The Moro reflex is a primitive survival reflex, present from birth, typically fading between 3 and 6 months. When a newborn experiences a sudden drop in sensory input, a change in position, a sudden sound, a shift in temperature, the nervous system interprets it as a threat. The arms fling out, the back arches, and the baby cries. In evolutionary terms, this reflex may have helped a primate infant cling to their mother when they sensed a fall. In a modern nursery, it's the reason your baby wakes the second they leave your arms. Here's the neuroscience behind it. A newborn's nervous system has not yet developed the inhibitory pathways that allow the cortex to moderate reflex responses. In adults, the prefrontal cortex and other higher brain regions constantly regulate and suppress reflexes that would otherwise fire constantly. In newborns, those pathways are barely formed. The lower brain, the brainstem, the limbic system, is running the show, and the lower brain is a threat detection machine. This is also why swaddling works. Swaddling doesn't just keep the arms contained. It provides continuous proprioceptive input to the nervous system. The gentle pressure signals to the brainstem, you are held, you are contained, you are safe. It essentially mimics the sensory environment of the womb, where the baby was surrounded by the uterine wall on all sides. Without that input, the nervous system is in open space, hypervigilant, scanning for threats. And here's something worth sitting with. The reason your baby sleeps better in your arms isn't because they're spoiled or because you've created a bad habit. It's because your body, your heartbeat, your warmth, your movement, your smell provides exactly the continuous sensory input their nervous system needs to stay regulated. You are, neurologically speaking, their external regulator. That role is exhausting. It's also, when you understand it, one of the most profound things a human being can do for another. The moral reflex fades on its own as the cortex develops and inhibitory pathways mature. Until then, swaddling, motion, and contact aren't crutches. They're neuroscience. If you've watched your baby sleep, you've noticed something strange. Their eyes flutter, their face twitches, their fingers curl and uncurl. They make small sounds. They look like they're dreaming about something very important. They are. And the proportion of their sleep spent in this state is something that should genuinely amaze you. In adults, REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the stage associated with dreaming, memory consolidation, and emotional processing, makes up roughly 20 to 25% of total sleep time. In newborns, REM sleep makes up approximately 50% of their total sleep. Some researchers estimate it's even higher in premature infants, possibly closer to 80%. Why? Because REM sleep is not just rest. In infants, it appears to be a primary driver of brain development. During REM sleep, the brain is intensely active, firing synapses, pruning unnecessary connections, strengthening neural pathways, processing the enormous sensory flood of a new world. The twitching you see isn't random. Researchers have found that the motor twitches during infant REM sleep correspond to specific neural circuits being activated and tested, almost as if the brain is running diagnostics on its own developing motor system. Here's why this matters for sleep resistance. REM sleep is light sleep. It's the stage from which you are most easily aroused. And because infants spend so much time in REM, they are cycling through light sleep far more frequently than adults do. An adult sleep cycle runs roughly 90 minutes. An infant sleep cycle runs roughly 45 to 50 minutes. And at the end of every cycle, there's a brief partial arousal, a moment where the brain surfaces toward wakefulness before descending back into sleep. Adults do this too, but we have the neurological capacity to self-soothe back to sleep without fully waking. We roll over, adjust, and drop back under without even knowing it happened. Infants don't have that capacity yet. At the end of each 45-minute cycle, when they surface into that partial arousal, they lack the neurological tools to independently return to sleep. They need the conditions that were present when they fell asleep. If they fell asleep nursing, they need to nurse. If they fell asleep in your arms, they need your arms. If they fell asleep with motion, they need motion. This is what sleep researchers call sleep associations, not habits in the behavioral sense, but neurological anchors. The baby isn't demanding a specific experience out of preference. They're requiring the sensory conditions their nervous system learned to associate with the transition into sleep. Understanding this doesn't immediately solve the 2 a.m. wake-up, but it does transform the question from, why won't my baby just sleep, to what does my baby's brain need to complete this transition? And that is a much more solvable problem. If what you've heard so far has made you exhale, even a little, then you know what to do. Leave a like on this video, not because I'm asking you to, but because this kind of understanding is exactly what exhausted parents deserve more of, and the algorithm will show it to another parent who needs it tonight. We're not even at the halfway point yet. What's coming next? The cortisol piece especially is the part that makes everything else click into place. Stick with me. We've talked about adenosine building sleep pressure. We've talked about melatonin anchoring the circadian clock. Now let's talk about the third neurochemical player in the infant sleep story, and the one most parents have never heard explained properly: cortisol. Most people know cortisol as the stress hormone, and that framing is accurate. Cortisol does spike in response to stress. But what most people don't realize is that cortisol is also a fundamental part of the normal waking cycle. In adults, cortisol follows a predictable daily rhythm. It peaks sharply in the morning, roughly 30 to 45 minutes after waking, and gradually declines through the day, hitting its lowest point in the middle of the night. This is called the cortisol awakening response, and it's what gives you that initial alertness in the morning. In infants, this cortisol rhythm doesn't mature until roughly 3 to 4 months of age, and it doesn't fully consolidate until 6 months or later. Before that, cortisol doesn't follow a predictable daily curve. It spikes in response to stimulation, hunger, discomfort, and overstimulation. But it doesn't reliably decline in the evening the way it does in an adult. This creates a specific and very common scenario. It's early evening, what many parents call the witching hour, typically between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. The baby has been accumulating sensory input all day: sounds, faces, light, touch, movement. By late afternoon, a newborn's nervous system is saturated. Cortisol has been spiking and respiking throughout the day in response to all of this input. And now, just when the household is at its busiest, dinner being made, older siblings coming home, the general noise of family life, the baby hits a cortisol wall. The baby cries, inconsolably. Nothing works. Parents try feeding, rocking, walking, singing. The baby escalates, and parents often interpret this as hunger, colic, or a sign that something is wrong. What's happening is that the baby's stress hormone system has been overwhelmed, and without a mature inhibitory system to bring cortisol back down, the baby cannot self-regulate. They are trapped in a neurochemical feedback loop that they literally cannot escape on their own. Here's what actually helps: reducing sensory input, dim lights, quiet, warmth, skin contact, motion. Not because these are magic, but because each of them actively works to bring the nervous system down from its elevated state. Skin contact in particular triggers oxytocin release in both parent and baby, which directly counteracts cortisol. Rhythmic motion, walking, rocking, swaying, engages the vestibular system in a way that has a documented calming effect on infant arousal. The witching hour isn't a mystery. It's a cortisol crash in a system that hasn't yet learned to manage its own stress chemistry. And the cure isn't a trick. It's co-regulation. Your calm nervous system helping to bring theirs down. Let's address something that confuses almost every new parent at some point. The baby who just ate a full, complete feed and still will not sleep. You've fed them, you've burped them, you've held them upright, you've waited, they're still fussing. And somewhere in your exhausted brain you're thinking, what more could they possibly need? Here's the thing. Hunger and sleep in newborns are not two separate systems that take turns. They are deeply entangled, and the entanglement is neurological. Newborns have what's called an ultradian rhythm, a cycle that repeats multiple times within a 24-hour period, much shorter than the circadian cycle. This ultradian cycle governs feeding and sleep in tandem. Roughly every 2 to 3 hours, the newborn cycles through hunger, feeding, brief wakefulness, and sleep. This isn't a schedule you impose. It's a biological rhythm already running. But here's where it gets complicated. The act of feeding itself is stimulating. Suckling activates the nervous system. A vigorous feed can actually temporarily elevate arousal rather than reduce it. So in the immediate aftermath of feeding, many babies go through a brief alert period, not because they're not tired, but because the feeding process itself woke them up a little. This is why the old advice to feed until they fall asleep works sometimes and fails other times. If the baby falls asleep nursing or on the bottle before they've fully fed, they'll wake again shortly from hunger. If they feed fully, they may be too stimulated to immediately sleep. The window between just fed and ready to sleep is real. It's typically somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes. And learning to read it is one of the most useful things a new parent can develop. There's also the question of feeding composition. Breast milk changes throughout a feed. The foremilk, the milk that comes first, is higher in lactose and lower in fat. The hind milk, the milk that comes as the feed progresses, is richer in fat and has a more satiating effect. A baby who consistently gets mostly foremilk, often because feeds are cut short or breasts are switched too quickly, may be genuinely hungry again sooner than expected, not because they're cluster feeding for no reason, but because the caloric density of what they received wasn't sufficient to hold them. This isn't a guilt trip for breastfeeding parents. It's a variable worth knowing about because it explains a pattern that otherwise looks completely random. The hunger-sleep loop is real, but it's not a problem with your baby's appetite or your milk supply. It's a developmental system running exactly as designed, just at a frequency that feels unsustainable from the outside. Here is the part of this video I want you to remember when you're in the thick of a sleep regression. Your baby's brain doesn't develop in a smooth, gradual upward curve. It develops in bursts, sudden, intense periods of neural reorganization, where enormous amounts of new wiring are laid down in a very short time. These are sometimes called developmental leaps, and the timing of the major ones is remarkably consistent across infants. Around 4 months, around 8 to 10 months, around 12 months, around 18 months. These aren't random fussy periods. They correspond to documented shifts in brain organization, shifts that have been observed in neuroimaging research and behavioral studies for decades. The 4-month leap is the most significant for sleep, and it deserves particular attention. Around this age, infant sleep architecture undergoes a permanent reorganization. The newborn sleep pattern, which cycles between active sleep, essentially REM, and quiet sleep in a relatively simple 2-stage pattern, transitions toward the more complex multi-stage architecture of adult sleep. This means the brain now cycles through light sleep, deeper sleep, and REM in a more sophisticated sequence. This is a developmental achievement. It's the brain maturing. But in the short term, it makes sleep harder, not easier, because the baby is now experiencing more frequent partial arousals between cycles, and they haven't yet developed the self-soothing skills to navigate them. This is why parents often say, "My baby used to sleep great, and now everything has fallen apart." The baby didn't regress. The brain upgraded. The old sleep patterns literally no longer exist. The neural architecture that supported them has been reorganized. What parents call the 4-month sleep regression is actually a 4-month sleep progression that temporarily makes things harder. Understanding this reframe is genuinely useful. If you know that the disruption is caused by a brain that just got more sophisticated, you stop trying to fix it and start focusing on helping the baby adapt to their new neurological reality. The goal shifts from get back to how it was, which is impossible because that brain is gone, to help the baby learn to navigate this new architecture. And here's the part worth holding on to. Every developmental leap your baby survives, every night you got through, represents a brain that is building itself. The hard nights are not evidence that something is wrong. They are, in a very real sense, evidence that something is going profoundly, remarkably right. If you know a parent right now who's in the middle of a sleep regression and convinced something is broken, send them this video. What they need isn't a sleep training program. They need to know what's actually happening. We've covered a lot of neuroscience in this video, and I want to end with something that ties all of it together. Because the science doesn't just explain why your baby fights sleep. It also says something important about what they need when they do. The concept that developmental researchers keep returning to is co-regulation. Co-regulation is the process by which an infant's nervous system borrows regulatory capacity from a calm, attuned caregiver. Because the infant brain lacks the mature prefrontal circuits to manage its own emotional and physiological states, it relies on an external source of regulation, a calm heartbeat, a steady voice, a warm body, predictable responsiveness. Over time, through thousands of these co-regulation experiences, the infant brain gradually builds its own internal regulatory capacity. The scaffolding you provide now is literally the architecture of their future emotional resilience. This is why responding to your baby at night is not creating bad habits. It's not spoiling. The research on this is consistent and has been for decades. Responsive caregiving in infancy, including at night, is associated with more secure attachment, better emotional regulation in toddlerhood, and greater independence, not less, as children grow. The babies who are held, responded to, and co-regulated in infancy don't become clingy, dependent children. They become children who internalize the experience of being soothed, and who can therefore eventually soothe themselves. Now, and this matters, none of this means you have to respond in any particular way, or that every approach works for every family. Parents have limits. Sleep deprivation is a genuine health concern. Families make different choices about night parenting, sleep arrangements, and sleep training for real, valid reasons. The science doesn't prescribe a single right answer. What it does do is free you from the fear that responding to your baby is making things worse. It isn't. It's doing exactly what biology designed it to do. Here's what I want you to take from everything you've heard today. Your baby fights sleep because their circadian system is still under construction, because their adenosine clears too fast and their cortisol has no daily rhythm yet, because their startle reflex fires at the slightest sensory shift, because half their sleep is REM, light, active, easily disrupted, because their brain is reorganizing itself in real time, building architecture that will last a lifetime. None of that is a problem. All of it is a process, and you, exhausted doing your best at 3 a.m., are not failing that process. You are part of it, the warm body they need, the heartbeat they're calibrating to, the voice that tells their nervous system, "You are safe, I am here, this is okay." Be honest with yourself for a second. How many nights have you spent wondering if you were doing it wrong? Drop a number in the comments, because I have a feeling you're not alone. And if this video gave you even one moment of, oh, that's what's happening, that's exactly what it was made for. If you've made it this far, you're not just a parent looking for tricks. You're someone who wants to actually understand their child. That's the kind of curiosity that changes the whole experience of parenting, not just the sleep stuff. That's what this channel exists for. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if this video helped you see your baby differently, leave a like so the algorithm puts it in front of another exhausted parent tonight. Your baby isn't fighting you. Their brain is just finishing itself. Thanks for watching. The end screen has more videos in the same world. Pick whichever video on the end screen calls to you. There's more here for curious parents.